Hi everyone, I'm Daniel McInnes and I'm the Shared Stewardship Coordinator with the U.S. Forest Service Southern Region out of our regional office in Atlanta. So shared stewardship is a strategy that integrates the agency's decision making with states and partners to achieve conservation and restoration outcomes at the landscape level. So as part of the agency's effort to steward the whole, the Forest Service helps convene the Keeping Forest Partnership. Keeping Forest is the Southern Region's high priority working forest conservation initiative that's supported by around 40 partners from across the forestry community. So forests really are our planet's hardest workers, right? They help drive our economy here in the South. They positively impact the physical and the psychological health of our communities. They help filter our precious water and air. They provide abundant habitat for wildlife, and they offer just a wealth of recreation opportunities. Over 110 million people and growing call the South home and depend upon the benefits that the roughly 245 million acres of forest land in the South provide. So we're incredibly fortunate in the Southern region to have a long history of landscape level assessments related to forests. It dates all the way back to the late 60s. These assessments look at how land use is changing and also the condition of our forests. The most recent assessment, which was developed by the U.S. Forest Service and the Southern Group of State Foresters, is the Southern Forest Futures Project, which was published in 2012. So the Futures Report forecast that we could lose up to 23 million acres of forest land to development by 2060. So Keeping Forest was started to address this potential loss of forest land, and the approach to conservation is radically different than the traditional approaches. So partners within the initiative, are a diverse range and include NGOs, industry, private landowners, federal, state, and local governments, water utilities, among others, but we all have a common mission, right? And that's to ensure that in 2060, we still have at least 245 million acres of forest land in the region. We're focused on systems level change using a collective impact model. And one of the best options for conserving forest land in the South, we believe, is to provide markets for private forest landowners because they own 86% of the forests in the region, right? So that's why Keeping Forest is presenting this webinar series on forest products. The partnership is looking for ways to expand the use of products from southern forests, going beyond consumer goods to include construction technologies and other things. And that's really so that private landowners can achieve their management objectives. They have the economic incentive to achieve those management objectives and to keep their lands in forests. So thank you for joining. And before we move on to our topic of the day, let's hear from a few of our Keeping Forest partners.
Hello, I'm John Mulcahy, Vice President of Stewardship at Georgia Pacific. Here at GP, we believe that the role of business and society is to help people to improve their lives. We do that by using forest products to create solutions that help people improve their lives by creating shelter, improving hygiene, offering convenience, extending shelf life, and protecting goods in transit. It's important for us to be good stewards of the natural environment and ensure that forests remain healthy and abundant in perpetuity. That's why we work with organizations like Keeping Forests, and we share their commitment to create the conditions that will help forests to grow, working with the landowners, ensuring that they have incentives to take care of their land and to replant after harvest.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sam Cook. I'm here at NC State in the College of Natural Resources. I serve as the Executive Director of Forest Assets and our Vice President of the Natural Resources Foundation. We work to develop leaders and solutions for challenges impacting the environment, economy, and society. Our Sustainability Office was established in April of 2008 to serve as a centralized resource of sustainability information and action for our students, faculty, and staff. The mission is equipping the NC State community for a leaner, smarter, stronger future. Our vision is a cultural that creates leaders and sustainable solutions for global challenges. How does this fit into the mission of Keeping Forests? Since I explained earlier, we at Keeping Forests are a diverse coalition conserving the natural, economic, and cultural values of responsible managed southern forests. Through the power of collaboration, we are redefining the challenges of forest conservation in new, and compelling ways. I feel like this mission that Keeping Forests has provided is allowing us to be partners here at NC State in the outcome, because we can join together to make sure that this solution come true by 2060. Thank you for your time.
I'm Brian Dangler, Senior Vice President for the Conservation Fund's Working Forest Fund program. For the past 37 years, the Conservation Fund has been the leader in protecting America's working forests, lands, waters, and special places. As the nation's only conservation organization with a dual charter for both land and water conservation as well as compatible economic development, our work has always been about the conscious effort to include people in nature. That is how we at the Conservation Fund define sustainability. Can we conserve nature and society at the same time? Our Working Forest Fund program is specifically designed to permanently protect America's privately held large working forests. These lands have been assembled by the vertically integrated forest products companies over a century, and they're rapidly being sold off into smaller and smaller pieces, and eventually they will be developed, changed into different land uses. We've conserved about 1 million acres so far. We have a goal of conserving another 5 million in 10 years. We think permanently protecting large working forests for all the co-benefits they provide society is our nation's most urgent conservation priority. And it fits perfectly into the mission of the Keeping Forests Initiative.
Now I want to welcome Kathi Rowzie. She's the president of Two Sides North America, and she'll be talking to us, she'll be telling us a little bit more about the work that she does as part of Two Sides North America. So she's a communications, public affairs, and sustainability professional whose career spans more than 30 years in corporate and consulting roles with Fortune 5 companies, including extensive experience in the paper and forest products industry. Before joining Two Sides in March of 2020, she served for 5 years as vice president of communications and public affairs at Verso Corporation. And prior to that, she worked at International Paper, providing communication strategy support to the chairman and CEO. I'm going to welcome Kathi right now. She's a Washington, D.C. native, received her BS in journalism from the University of Maryland College of Journalism, and is located in Dayton, Ohio. So Kathi, you can go ahead and share your screen again.
Great. Have you given me back the screen share?
Yeah, it should be okay.
All right. Very good. Thank you, everyone. I really appreciate the opportunity to be with you today. And I'm going to be talking a little bit about making the environmental case for paper, which is really why Two Sides exists. And as you probably know, there are a lot of myths out there about paper and paper products. So I'd like to delve into that a little bit more with you today. Okay, why is my screen not advancing? There we go. First, in case you don't know much about Two Sides, I'd like to tell you a little bit. We are a global nonprofit member-funded organization. As you can see on the map here, we have affiliates around the globe in North and South America, the UK, Europe, South Africa, Australia, and New Zealand. And our members come from across the entire print, paper, and paper-based packaging value chain. So everything from the large paper producers to merchants, converters, printers, equipment manufacturers, you name it. Our members come from literally across the entire value chain, and they're range in size from the major paper companies all the way down to mid and small size family-owned printers. So really a diverse membership, and we have more than 600 members globally, and around 150 members here in North America, in the US and Canada. And our mission is really quite narrowly focused and straightforward. We exist to eliminate misleading and unsubstantiated environmental claims about print, paper, and paper-based packaging. And that's really why Two Sides was formed a little over a decade ago was to help address all those myths out there about paper and paper-based packaging. And of course, we also promote the sustainability of the paper industry and its products. And why are we doing it? Because, you know, environmental myths are damaging to business and public perceptions of paper products. And I'm sure you see these all the time. Rick Cantrell just sent me one this morning that was saying, encouraging people to switch to electronic communication because it saves trees and protects the environment. And there are a handful of issues that we focus on, which you see here. And Two Sides does regular surveys. This one that you see here, our 2021 Trend Tracker survey, was the first in a series that we plan to do every 2 years to really explore consumers' changing preferences and perceptions and attitudes about print, paper, and paper-based packaging. And the survey covered 8,800 consumers around the world, with 1,000 of them in the US. And it was conducted for us by independent international research company Toluna. And the key headlines in the survey are one, that consumers believe US forests are shrinking. There remains a significant gap between consumer perceptions of how much paper really gets recycled or how much paper they believe is recycled and what really gets recycled. And on the packaging side, a little bit of more good news is that paper packaging is preferred as the environmental choice. But, you know, again, the myths are so pervasive out there that they influence people's use of paper and their willingness to use paper. So that's the kinds of things that we are addressing at Two Sides. So I'd like to dig a little bit deeper into those survey results and show you what we found. First, we asked consumers what they think has been happening to US forests over the last 30 years. And as you see here, 60% believe that US forests are shrinking in size. We also asked people if they think it's important to use paper products from sustainably managed forests. And a high percentage of those said yes, but still people, because of all the greenwashing that's going on, tend to connect their perceptions that forests are shrinking with paper. So we need to make a better connection between sustainable forestry and what's actually happening in the forest. Then we asked people, when you're thinking about paper and paper-based packaging, what percentage do you think is recycled? And here you see that only a small percentage really understand, 11%, that more than 60% of paper and paper-based packaging gets recycled in the United States. And fully half think it's less than 40%. 43% also think that paper and paper-based packaging is a major cause of greenhouse gas emissions. And this is one that we're hearing more and more about, that paper and paper-based packaging production uses excessive amounts of water that damages the environment. And a whopping 67% believe that electronic communication is more environmentally friendly than paper communication. And again, a lot of this comes from the greenwashing that's been being done by corporations, as I just mentioned, the one that Rick just sent me this morning, that are telling people that they should switch to electronic communications, bills and statements, electronic banking, and so on, because it saves trees and because it's better for the environment and because it reduces carbon footprint. Now on the packaging side, as I mentioned, the results are a little bit better, and we attribute this a lot to, over the last couple of years, the attention in the media and from others, NGOs, about plastic packaging and how it's damaging the environment and the amount of plastic packaging that's being found in our oceans and that sort of thing. So on the packaging side, 50% of respondents believe that paper-based packaging is better for the environment than other types of packaging. And a fairly large percentage say they are actually taking steps to increase their use of paper-based packaging. So the news is a little bit better on the packaging side, but I can guarantee you, just like on the paper side, that the plastics industry and the petroleum industry will be coming after paper to discredit the idea that paper-based packaging is indeed better for the environment. So going back to the greenwashing discussion for a minute, a lot of companies are making greenwashing claims against paper, and I'm sure you see them all the time, probably maybe on your bank statement or your utility bill. And greenwashing is really the reason that Two Sides got started in the first place about 10 years ago. And we've been working to end those anti-paper, unsubstantiated environmental claims ever since. Now, the Federal Trade Commission actually has guides for environmental marketing claims. And the FTC says that claims really have to be truthful, not misleading, and supported by a reasonable basis, which they say is competent and reliable scientific evidence. And the FTC Green Guides, as they're often called, actually says that it's deceptive to represent directly or by implication that a product has a general environmental benefit, that it's green or eco-friendly or so on. But a lot of marketers aren't paying attention to the Green Guides and are doing it anyway. You all may be more familiar with the International Organization for Standardization, ISO, and the ISO 1421 standard. And that standard also has standards for self-declared environmental claims that are pretty similar to the Trade Commission's standards, that says that you shouldn't be using those kind of vague, non-specific claims, primarily because they're difficult, if not impossible, to prove, and that you need evidence grounded in sound science to prove it if you're going to use them. And ISO in their standard also says that you shouldn't imply an environmental benefit by using things like trees and globes and leaves and those sort of things. So when we talk to people about their greenwashing, we also, in addition to asking them to remove claims, ask them to remove those kind of symbols that imply, whether stated or not, that electronic communication is better for the environment. So our greenwashing campaign, as I said, has been going on for a little bit over a decade. And we are really the only industry organization that directly challenges major corporations and other organizations that use unsubstantiated environmental claims about paper to convert consumers to electronic communications. And you see there on the right some of the big company wins that we've had. And we're really the only, I know that you had the Paper and Packaging Board speak to you recently, and they do a great job of promoting the sustainability of paper-based packaging, but they, by their charter, are not allowed to directly contact companies about their greenwashing efforts. So we are the only ones out there that are doing this right now. And so far, we've persuaded 157 leading North American companies to either remove or change their claims, and that number is over 800 globally with our affiliates around the world. And you may think, well, 157 doesn't sound like many for a 10-year period of time, but you have to consider that those 157 are the leading banks and utilities that service millions and millions of customers. So our campaign has literally helped remove billions of misleading instances of misleading environmental messages from those companies. And here's just one example. This is a large power company, American Electric Power, and they just changed their claims within the last few weeks. You see here before, and this was actually on their website, but they're using the same kinds of claims on their on their bills and statements to their customers. I hope you can see it. It says, sign up today, go paperless, save time and trees by getting your bill online instead of in the mail. And below that, save paper, help the environment by having bills delivered via email, saving paper and trees. And after we worked with them, this is now what their website looks like. And you can see that all of those anti-paper environmental claims have been removed, and they focus more on timeliness and convenience and reliability. Two Sides also works with government agencies to remove environmental claims. And one that I include this one for Medicare because in a sense, it kind of surprised us. Medicare each year publishes a booklet on Medicare programs, what they cover, what options are available, and so forth. And it's a pretty thick booklet. It's about 100 pages. And last year, they started very proactively promoting receiving the booklet electronically instead of in the mail. And Two Sides got more complaints on this than any other greenwashing case that we've ever had. And so we wrote a letter to the acting head of the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare, making our case for paper, explaining why paper is a sustainable choice, and also pointing out that electronics do have a large and growing environmental footprint. And frankly, was kind of shocked that we got a response from Medicare within 2 weeks, which if you deal much with the federal government, sometimes that's not the case. Not to offend anybody here who works for the federal government, but they sent us a letter back saying that they would indeed stop using the anti-paper environmental claims. And one of the things that particularly caught their eye in the letter that we wrote them is one of the things we talk about is the jobs that are at risk, when the American jobs that are at risk, when these kinds of unsubstantiated claims are used to influence people to stop using paper. So really pleased with that. And because of that, 44 million Americans are no longer seeing those anti-paper environmental claims from Medicare. We also address claims in the media. There's a lot of them, and we can't obviously address all of them. So we try to address the ones where we think we can have some influence. One of our most successful ones was with Popular Science magazine, who you'd think with science in their title would be a little bit more discerning about what they published. But they published an article about how the modern paper industry was destroying the environment. And it was written by a couple of pop culture writers. And while we sent them a letter to the editor, and while they didn't actually publish the letter, they did on their website say that they had gotten a lot of response to the article, and they hired an actual credible journalist to do a follow-up story and linked it to the original story. And the follow-up story was a lot more fair and balanced and presented a much more realistic picture of the paper industry and its products. And now, because it was fair and balanced, they also talked to some of the NGOs, and we didn't agree with everything in the article, but at least we're getting out there and we're getting people to understand and tell both sides, two sides of the story, if you will. We also are finding that we're seeing a lot of unsubstantiated claims about paper in the trade media, not the paper trades, but in industry trade medias for things like groceries and cosmetics and those sort of things. So we've been particularly looking at those kinds of publications and writing to their editors, hoping to convince them to be a little more objective and realistic in their reporting about paper. So I touched on this just a minute ago, but why are we pursuing greenwashing claims? Well, you know, when you have respected companies, the media and the government selling these claims all the time, over and over again, perceptions of paper products are negatively influenced among consumers. And it also influences their willingness to use paper. And share a little bit of additional information with you here. We just did a survey particularly about greenwashing, and we haven't published the results yet, so I didn't include it in the slides. But we looked at people who have seen greenwashing claims and those who have not, say they have not seen greenwashing claims in the communications from their service providers. And fully 65% of those who said that they had seen claims said that they were influenced to switch from paper to electronic communication. And the print, paper, and mail value chain supports over 7 million jobs in the United States, and obviously contributes a lot to our country's financial and economic output. So that's the real underlying reason behind why we're doing what we do, in addition to the fact that we want the environmental record of paper and paper-based packaging to be represented accurately. Two Sides also promotes the sustainability of paper products. We publish a variety of fact sheets, booklets, fact booklets on both packaging and printing papers, and a variety of resources that are available to our members. And the reason we do this is because we want to provide paper industry customers in particular, but really all stakeholders, with a fact-based foundation for making well-informed decisions about the use of paper, instead of making decisions on whether they want to use paper based on all those claims about saving trees and protecting the environment. We also have a very robust Two Sides. It's twosidesna.org. I encourage you to go and check it out. When you do, make sure you include the NA for North America, or you may link to one of our other affiliates around the world. We publish a regular blog on a wide variety of sustainability topics related to paper. And we also have a good following on social media, and I would encourage you to check out our social media platforms. Our LinkedIn platform in particular has increased followers by about 40% just since the beginning of last year. So a lot of people are taking notice and following us and sharing our information with their own audiences. So Two Sides is making the environmental case for paper every day, but we really believe that everyone whose livelihood is connected to paper has a stake in making the environmental case for paper. And we help people do that by providing the facts in a variety of ways. And as I mentioned before, all the materials that we produce they're not Two Sides' opinion about paper and the environment. They are all facts from credible third-party organizations, everyone from EPA and the Forest Service to the UN Food and Agriculture Organization, the World Resources Institute, and others. So very reliable information that people can depend on in making the environmental case. So what we encourage people to do is understand what the myths about paper are, and then have a ready arsenal of facts that support the environmental case for paper, so that when somebody asks them, or when they hear about claims that paper is bad for the environment, that they are ready to disarm those people with the facts. So I'd like to take you just through a little bit of the factual information that we use, give you an idea. Some of this will probably be very familiar to some of you, especially the information on forestry, but I just wanted to give you a picture of how we present it. So the first and possibly the biggest myth about paper is that it causes deforestation. So the first thing we try to do is educate people on what deforestation is. Now, we certainly wouldn't claim that deforestation doesn't happen and there aren't concerns with our forests, but we want people to understand that paper is not the reason that these things are happening. And so we let people know that deforestation is the permanent conversion of forest land to non-forest uses. And the UN Food and Agriculture Organization actually takes their definition a step further that says the sustainable harvesting of trees to make products that benefit society isn't considered for deforestation because the trees are going to grow back either through natural regeneration or through sustainable forestry practices. And that globally, the primary cause of deforestation is agriculture, which tends to be in the developing parts of the world where forests are being raised for agricultural crops to feed livestock. And I think as was mentioned in the video that you saw just a few minutes ago, urban development is the leading cause in the United States. And we also want people to understand what sustainable forestry is. You know, most people, when they hear the term sustainable forestry, think about planting trees. And certainly that is a major part of sustainable forestry. But we also want people to understand that sustainable forestry practices go far beyond that to protect the entire forest ecosystem, so that we're not looking at just trees, but soil, air, and water quality, and wildlife and habitat, biodiversity, the forest's ability to continue to sequester and contain carbon, even aesthetics. I mean, I think a lot of people wouldn't recognize the fact from the pictures that they see from NGOs and others that aesthetics is really a part of how forest land gets harvested a lot of times. And of course, the long-term social and economic benefits of the forest products that meet the needs of society, including the production of paper products. Now, here are some of the facts that we typically share. That North American forests are a renewable resource and are not shrinking. And in their global forest resources assessment, the UNFAO reported that net forest area in the US grew by 18 million acres between 1990 and 2020. And that's to help put that in perspective for people, that's the equivalent of about 1,200 NFL football fields of forest area every day. So it's a pretty impressive number. And also that tree harvesting in the US occurs on less than 2% of forest land each year, compared to the nearly 3% that's disturbed annually by natural events like insects, disease, and fire. And that's a Forest Service number, which many of you may recognize, and that's the number that's part of the information that they provided to the UNFAO for their report. And as many of you on this webinar know, those natural events probably will continue to increase insect infestations and disease and fire, a lot of it related to climate change. So we want people to understand that those things are happening, but that paper is not the reason behind them. And another important thing we want people to understand is that more than half, about 58% of forest land in the United States is privately owned. And about 89% of the wood harvested in the US comes from these privately owned forests, which provide most of the wood for the domestically produced paper and forest products industry. And a huge number of those private forest owners, the Forest Service estimates around 11 million, are small family forests who typically own less than 1,000 acres. So why is that so important? Well, the production of paper products is really a powerful economic engine and a driving force in keeping US lands forested, because when all of those forest landowners, they own their forests for many different reasons, but many own them for the income value. And when the forest products industry provides a reliable market for their trees, landowners are encouraged to continue to manage their land responsibly instead of selling it off for development or other non-forest uses. So this is really a big one, and one that we like to emphasize. Another big myth is that paper production is a major contributor to climate change. And people naturally think, paper is a manufacturing industry, uses a lot of energy to produce its products. So it must be contributing to climate change and to large amounts of CO2 emissions. But the facts are that the US pulp and paper industry generates more than half of the energy to power its operations from carbon neutral biomass. And as a result, the EPA greenhouse gas inventory reports that the US pulp and paper industry emits only about 0.5% of total US greenhouse gas emissions. We also try to help people understand, I'm not going to go into detail here because I know all of you, understand this principle, but we try to help people understand that the carbon that's released by burning biomass is basically recycling the carbon that was absorbed by the trees in the first place, and part of the biogenic carbon cycle, whereas that the carbon that's released from fossil fuel use is from resources that have been in the ground for millions of years and essentially emitting new carbon into the environment. So we think that's another important one. And just the importance of having sustainable forests and the paper industry's role in nurturing sustainable forests through sustainable forestry practices. The EPA reports that US forests and wood-based products capture and store roughly 14% of all CO2 emissions annually. This is one that often surprises a lot of people, that the myth is that the production of paper uses excessive amounts of water. But the fact is that, and it is true, that paper production uses a lot of water. Paper starts out as mostly water and fiber, as you know. But most of the water that's used in the paper making process is not consumed by the process. In a typical paper mill today, processed water is recycled 10 times or more, and then it's cleaned to meet strict state and federal water quality standards, and approximately 88% is returned to the source. And while the industry tells us that the water that's returned meets the water standards, if you talk to folks in paper mills, the EHS folks in paper mills who are regularly testing those waters, they will tell you that oftentimes the water that's returned to the environment is cleaner than it was when it was originally taken out. And about 1% of the water remains in the manufactured products, and the rest simply evaporates back into the environment. So nearly all the water that's used in the paper making process eventually ends back up into the environment. And another big one that using paper products is wasteful, and most paper goes to landfills. And if you recall back to the survey that we took, most people believe that. They believe that not a large amount of paper products gets recycled. But the latest figures from the EPA tell us that 68.2% of paper and paper-based packaging in the US gets recycled. And that number jumps all the way up to almost 97% for corrugated boxes. And this compares with plastics at around 9%, glass at 25%, and only about 34% of metals get recycled. So the big question there is, well, why does so much more paper get recycled? Well, the reason is that the US paper industry over the last 30 years has voluntarily invested literally billions and billions of dollars in recycling infrastructure. And just between 2019 and 2023, the industry has either implemented or committed another $5 billion for additional recycling infrastructure, paper recycling infrastructure. So when you combine all that investment with supports from consumers and communities and businesses, paper recycling really is an overwhelming environmental success story, and then one that we have to keep telling over and over again and better so people understand it, and that paper is not the wasteful product that many portray it to be. Another myth that we hear, particularly from some of the anti-paper NGOs, is that all paper and paper-based packaging must contain 100% recycled content to be truly sustainable. And that's kind of an easy thing to imagine on its face, but if you stop and think about it, it's really just common sense that it's a practical impossibility for all paper to be 100% recycled content, because that recycled fiber has to come from somewhere, and that the origin of that is the virgin fiber that made up the product that got recycled in the first place. Also, we know that recycled fibers can't be recycled indefinitely. The paper industry says typically paper can be recycled, depending on the grade, 5 to 7 times. Some studies have shown that lower grades, like corrugated boxes, may even be able to be recycled a bit more than that. And the reason is pretty, again, common sense. Just like other things in life, recycled fibers wear out. Once you recollect, clean, de-ink, bleach over and over again, the fibers are eventually going to weaken to the point where they can't bond together to make new paper, so they have to be replaced with virgin fiber. And that paper cycle is so important, because without the continuous introduction of that virgin fiber into the manufacturing system to replace the worn out recycled fiber, the manufacture of recycled paper products, and virtually all paper products, obviously, if you're not using virgin fiber, would quickly come to a halt. So talking about this, the circular economy has become a popular term of art these days. And I think one of the most exciting things about paper products is that the paper life cycle is already circular. And that's another message that we need to communicate more widely and deeply. We use, as we talked about, paper uses an infinitely renewable resource, all those trees from sustainably managed forests, both to supply fiber, and the forests, as we regrow them, are also capturing and storing carbon. The manufacturing system uses mostly renewable, carbon neutral bioenergy, and cleans and returns nearly all its processed water to the environment. And importantly, we're making products that people value and want and need every day. And then those products eventually, more than any other material in the United States, get recycled. Now, as you see in the diagram here, yes, there's still waste that comes out of the system, obviously, but we're working to improve those recycling numbers as well through things like education. Again, I go back to the Paper and Packaging Board presentation that you heard recently. They're doing an outstanding job of educating consumers through advertising and social media and other communication venues on how to recycle and what can be recycled. And the more people understand that, the more that we can put into the recycling system. And the industry itself is also doing things like providing guidance for recycling by design, where they're working with brands and packaging designers to design paper-based packaging, for example, that is recyclable based on how it's designed at the front end. So instead of just the paper portion, looking at additives and coatings and adhesives and decorative items that are added to paper packaging and those kinds of things, so that they can be designed up front so that consumers can just put them in their recycling bins and don't have to worry about what can be recycled and what can't be recycled. So it's really such an exciting story. And that's why I am so excited about telling it all the time. And another myth that I like to throw in is the myth that electronic communication is greener than print on paper. And this, of course, goes back to what I was talking to you about the greenwashing campaign. And when you think about paying a bill online or sending an email, you have your phone or your tablet in your hand. And people that really don't think about what's beyond that. They think of that simple little action and not all the environmental footprint around that action. So when you compare electronic communication to paper, the comparison is really quite astounding. First, when you look at raw materials, we talked about the renewable, sustainable trees that go into making paper. Well, electronic devices are made with finite raw materials, iron, copper, rare earth minerals that require environmentally intensive mining. That's from the Global E-Waste Monitor. And you may be familiar with the global technology company Cisco. In their most recent Internet Annual Report, they projected that by 2023, North America will have 5 billion networked devices, and that's up from just 3 billion or 40% in just the 5 years since 2018. So the number of electronic devices and the amount of electronic communication that's going throughout the system continues to grow. We talked about the renewable energy that's used to make paper. Well, electronic communication uses massive amounts of mostly fossil fuel energy at this point anyway, both to manufacture and operate and charge all those devices, and also the massive server farms that support them. And the environmental think tank, the Shift Project, reports that energy consumption required to power digital devices is increasing at 9% a year, and that the share of digital technologies in global greenhouse gas emissions continues to grow by nearly half between 2013 and 2018. And that as obviously as the share of digital technology grows, so will those emissions. And then we come to waste generation. As we said, paper is the most recycled product in North America. But the Global E-Waste Monitor also reports that the US annually generates around 7 million metric tons of electronic waste, and only about 15% of that gets recycled. The rest is either landfilled, burned, or dumped. And as levels of e-waste increase, so does the improper and unsafe treatment and disposal, and that poses significant threats not only to the environment, but also to human health. So in putting all these facts together, what we ask people to do is create their own paper sustainability elevator speech. Take the facts, the key facts, and put them into your own narrative that you can share with someone in 30 to 60 seconds when you hear somebody say that paper is unsustainable or using it destroys forests or is wasteful or whatever the case might be. So just as a recap here, I'm going to take you quickly through your paper sustainability elevator speech. 1, paper is made from an infinitely renewable resource, the trees grown in sustainably managed forests, or from recycled paper. Harvesting trees to make paper products is not a cause of deforestation because the trees will grow back through natural regeneration or sustainable forest management. More than half of the manufacturing energy demand at US paper mills is met using renewable, carbon neutral energy, mostly biomass. Paper manufacturing is not a major cause of greenhouse gas emissions that contribute to climate change. The paper industry emissions total only about 0.5% of total US emissions. Nearly all of the water used in the paper manufacturing process is cleaned to meet strict water quality standards and is returned to its source. More than 2/3 of paper and paper-based packaging gets recycled more than any other material. The life cycle of paper is already circular, minimizing resource use, carbon emissions, and waste. And electronic communication is not greener than print on paper. And while electronic communication has transformed our lives in many positive ways, this webinar is a great example of that. It also has wide-ranging environmental impacts that continue to grow. So with that, I will say thank you. Encourage you to subscribe to our news and updates. If you go to the bottom of the homepage of our website at twosidesna.org, you can sign up. And we won't bombard you with a lot of information, but I think you will find a lot of it useful. And also encourage you to follow us on LinkedIn. So thank you so much. And now I think we're going to take some questions.
You're on mute, Leslie.
Oh, thanks so much, Kathy. And I'm just going to remind everybody to put your questions in the Q&A. And if you are going to get credits for this from the continuing for CEUs, make sure you complete the process from the webinar. So this screen should be open and you just want to go to complete the webinar after you finish. If you don't, you can hit the contact button and we'll help you solve that. So I'll go ahead and get started with some of the first questions. Let's see. So here we go. One person says, as a regulator of hemp, I constantly get messages saying that paper produced from hemp is more sustainable than paper produced from trees. Is this something you have looked to as well?
I don't have a lot of facts on hemp. I mean, we know that there are a lot of alternative fibers that people are experimenting with. Some companies are already producing papers with things like hemp, bagasse, sugarcane, and other things. And they can be sustainable, but the point is that paper is sustainable in the way it's produced. And you have to, again, like anything else, you have to look at the entire life cycle. So, and I unfortunately, maybe someone else knows more about hemp, but you have to look at the life cycle of, where is the energy coming from? What kind of energy is being used? The transport, all of the things that are involved in the life cycle to really make that kind of a judgment.
I might jump in as well and say, from a forestry standpoint, the number of acres that would be required to grow enough hemp to make the paper products that we use today would be enormous. And I personally would rather have those acres in forests than in hemp farms.
Yeah, that's a good point. Well, and these trees are native to North America too, and hemp isn't necessarily native everywhere.
Yeah. And a lot of the other crops that are grown for forest for potentially for paper use also require things like other crops, more fertilizers and those kinds of things. So there's a wide range of issues to look at.
There's another question. Shelley says that in New Jersey, there's a law that goes into effect banning certain petroleum-based containers, including plastic bags at grocery stores. The problem is that this law is also going to ban large groceries from using paper bags. And she says, this person says, as far as she knows, every community in New Jersey has recycling programs for metal, plastic, and paper. So what do the New Jersey legislatures not understand? That paper recycling means that paper is reprocessed and reused. And she just asked if you're aware of this law and has any action been taken by you to educate New Jersey and other legislators or for similar laws.
Yeah, we're well aware of the laws. Two Sides is not involved in legislative activities. We leave that to the American Forest and Paper Association. But they have been very actively involved in these bag bans and trying to educate legislators as to why paper should not be included, why paper is a sustainable choice, and so on and so forth, and encouraging to do things like promoting better recycling and those kinds of, recycling education and those kinds of things, as opposed to banning them.
Great. So we had another question. What is something that the average person could do to dispel myths about paper in their local community?
Well, gosh, there's a variety of things. I mean, again, it's just knowing the facts and sharing them with the people that you know. If you participate in, town council meetings or county council meetings, those kinds of things, where these kinds of issues come up about paper bag bans and those kind of things, you can certainly, sign up to speak at those meetings and present the facts. I know we've had some folks who have had their kids bring things home from school that suggest that paper is bad for the environment, and had parents use two sides materials to go back to the school and say, look, this just isn't accurate, and you shouldn't be sharing this kind of information with our kids. So there's just something as simple as if you're in the grocery store and they ask you paper or plastic, say, oh, absolutely paper, and give them a sentence on why that's a good thing. Because I mean, it's like the old adage, I tell two friends and they tell two friends and they tell two friends, and eventually your message continues to widen. So I think any communication on the sustainability of paper is a good idea, and so in a way that you can actually help.
Great. Another person asks, how do you feel about phasing out single-use plastics?
Yeah, I mean, from an environmental perspective, I mean, I think at this point that it's a good idea, because the plastics industry really doesn't have the infrastructure to recycle single-use plastics. They're looking at ways to do that, like bioplastics and things like that, but those things are a long way off. So it's an interesting question. And again, as I said before, when you're comparing plastics and paper, I mean, I think it's clear to make an overwhelming case for paper, but the plastics industry is very powerful. They have a lot of money, and they are doing everything they can to promote their side and to say that they are doing things better, and they're looking at ways of changing things and preventing pollution and landfilling of plastics and those kinds of things. So.
Thanks. Another question about, as you look into the future, what are the data or research needs that would help you continue telling the story of sustainability in the paper sector?
Well, I think a part of the problem, not a problem, but an issue, is that research on environmental issues takes time. For example, the folks of you that are involved in forestry know that you have to look at landscapes over time and how things evolve and what's affecting those landscapes and so on and so forth. So quick changes in the facts don't come that often. So, but I mean, continuing forest research, I think certainly research on how climate change is affecting forests. I think the climate change obviously is the environmental issue of our time. And so looking at how paper is both an advantage in the climate change discussion, and forests in particular, I think adds to the overall discussions of the sustainability of paper products overall.
Great. Have another question about, has there been any effort to involve the Ad Council to promote the use of paper products?
We have not worked with the Ad Council. We have worked directly with newspapers and magazines. We have a secondary separate campaign called Love Paper that is more consumer facing. And we encourage, we don't have a budget for advertising. So we encourage publications to give us remainder ad space for some of our ads. But we found that the Ad Council is much more limited in the kinds of things that they promote. So we haven't pursued that.
Great. All right, we have the last question. Just, someone was noting that, let's see, that they want to know, how is it, how do you compete with all the NGOs out there, and how Madison Avenue is convince the public that harvesting trees is not environmentally friendly. I think you addressed some of this, but feel free to, if you want to wrap up on this note.
Yeah, well, I mean, the NGOs are certainly active, and again, the media often promotes the kinds of things that the NGOs say without looking at the science. So we're trying to provide the facts everywhere we can. And as I said, we talk to the media, we talk to corporations, we talk to everybody. Because I mean, a lot of what we're trying to do are the Paper and Packaging Board campaign is reaching out to consumers. And while consumers are certainly part of our audience, the people that we really want to understand the facts about the sustainability of print and paper are paper industry customers and their customers, the people who are making decisions about buying and using paper, which then, and educating them so then they can educate their customers and consumers. So it's kind of a trickle down effect. And so we are really trying to hit everybody in the audience from different angles with the science so that they understand. But the NGOs we don't engage the NGOs directly. We found that not to be fruitful, quite honestly. They are typically not interested in dialogue, about a back and forth dialogue. They have a very distinct point of view and are not willing to change that. So we look at the things that they are promoting and provide answers to others about why those things are not true and why paper is sustainable.
Great. Well, I just want to thank you so much, Kathi, for your time and for the great presentation. The recording will be available at the same link. And if you're looking to get your continuing education credits, make sure you complete the workflow. It's 1:59. If Kathi wants to answer a couple more questions, she can, but I just want to let everyone go and respect your time as well. So thanks so much.